"Mom, do I have a grandpa?" The question came just as Rachel was pouring hot cocoa into a chipped mug with a painted reindeer. Her hand froze midair, a few drops spilling over the rim and pooling on the counter. She turned slowly, eyes landing on Lily, who was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, carefully folding colored paper with the kind of quiet seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. Rachel didn't answer right away. The question, so innocent, so unassuming, landed like a stone in her chest. She reached for a towel and wiped the spilled cocoa, her mind spinning, trying to smooth out the past, like it was just another mess on the counter. "You do," she said eventually, her voice soft. Lily looked up, curious. "Then, how come we never see him?" Rachel lowered herself onto the couch, staring blankly at the blinking Christmas light taped around the window frame. Their little tree sat in the corner, modest and slightly lopsided. Decorated with dollar store ornaments and paper snowflakes Lily had made herself. It looked festive. It even looked cheerful. But after Lily's question, it felt like a set piece. She had always known this moment would come. Just not during Christmas, not when every other child in Lily's class was buzzing about going home, seeing cousins sitting on laps of grandparents who smelled like cinnamon and peppermint. Rachel had spent years protecting Lily from the people who had once called themselves family, but the absence had grown louder this year, and Lily had started to hear it. Rachel took a breath. It's complicated. But Lily wasn't deterred. She picked up her scissors and asked brightly, "Can I make him a card? I want to make Christmas cards for everyone, for Grandma, Aunt Melissa, and Grandpa, too." Rachel froze again. Those names, each one like a bruise pressed too hard. Barbara, Melissa, Walter, her parents, and her sister. People who years ago had watched her walk out of their house with a duffel bag and a broken heart and never looked back. No calls, no letters, no questions. Just silence. Rachel had tried to believe that silence was safer. But now, Lily was beginning to fill in the blanks with her own hopes. Their apartment in Philadelphia was small and cold, especially in December. The radiator made a hissing sound when it worked, which wasn't always. But Lily never complained. She made joy out of what she had. A blanket fort from couch cushions, a star cut from aluminum foil, a cup of cocoa that was mostly milk and imagination. Still, Rachel couldn't give her what she truly wanted: belonging, and that was what this was really about. Lily wasn't asking for a toy or another ornament. She was asking why her world felt like it was missing pieces other kids seemed to have without trying. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Rachel sat by the window watching flakes of snow drift beneath the street lamp. She sipped cheap red wine from the same reindeer mug, letting the silence wrap around her like a threadbare blanket. Her mind wandered back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to the house she grew up in, to the perfectly arranged wreaths, the scent of wood polish, the forced smiles. Her father, Walter, always in his recliner, whiskey in hand. Her mother, Barbara, pristine and polite, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and Melissa, her older sister, sharp, beautiful, and forever looking down on Rachel like she was an unwanted shadow. They hadn't reached out since the divorce. Since Rachel had stood in their doorway, visibly pregnant, and watched her father's expression harden. He'd said nothing, just turned and walked away. Rachel had built a new life after that small yes, but safe, and she had promised herself never to go back. But Lily's question had cracked something open. She knew what going back might mean. The stares, the judgment, the frost that didn't melt even in the warm glow of Christmas lights. But she also knew what staying away meant. It meant lying. It meant letting Lily believe that nothing existed beyond these apartment walls. And for the first time in years, Rachel wondered if that silence was still protecting them, or just imprisoning them. The next morning, she booked a rental car. Lily's excitement was instant. She started making more cards, one for each family member, using the glitter glue Rachel always dreaded cleaning up. She asked how to spell Grandma and Aunt Melissa, carefully writing the names in big block letters on envelopes. "Do you think they'll like them?" she asked one night, holding up a drawing of a Christmas tree with tiny stick figure people around it. Rachel smiled and nodded. I think they'll be surprised. She didn't lie. She didn't say they'd love it, but she also didn't say the truth, that these people might take Lily's kindness and toss it aside like junk mail. By the afternoon of December 24th, they were on the road. The drive to Lancaster was quiet. The sky hung heavy with clouds, and the air had that stillness that only comes before a snowfall. Rachel kept her eyes on the road, both hands gripping the steering wheel like it might try to escape. Lily sat in the back, humming softly to herself, legs swinging. She clutched a small tote bag filled with her handmade cards and the little presents they'd wrapped in tissue paper. Most were simple folded origami, a paper snowflake, a bead, bracelet. Things made with care and hope. As they turned onto the familiar street, Rachel's breath caught. The house hadn't changed. The lawn was neatly trimmed. The shutters were painted a perfect shade of deep green. Lights lined the windows in straight, sterile rows. A glowing reindeer stood stiffly in the front yard. Through the large front window, Rachel could see the tree. It was tall, nearly touching the ceiling, and decorated in what looked like color-coordinated perfection. Red and gold. Not a single handmade ornament in sight. It was beautiful, and it made her sick. She pulled up to the curb and turned off the engine, the ticking of the cooling car loud in the sudden stillness. Lily unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door handle, but paused when she saw Rachel wasn't moving. Rachel sat there staring at the house. The lights, the wreath on the door, the illusion. She closed her eyes and whispered so quietly Lily didn't hear, "Please don't let this break her." Then she exhaled, opened the door and stepped out into the cold. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," Walter said, not bothering to look up from the television. The voice hit Rachel like an old bruise being pressed hard, flat. As if the past 3 years, or the 7 before that, were nothing more than a silent inconvenience. He didn't get up, didn't smile, just flicked the remote toward the volume button and leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under the familiar shape of someone too used to not being challenged. Rachel stood in the entryway, blinking. The cold outside was harsh, but it was nothing compared to the chill in that room. Barbara appeared next. Wrapped in her usual winter elegance, soft gray sweater, pearls, a scent of lavender, and calculated distance, she approached Rachel with a quick, practiced hug, one that barely touched shoulders and never reached the chest. Then she turned to Lily, bent down as if to acknowledge a polite stranger, and said, "You must be Lily. Look at you getting so big." Her gaze dropped briefly to Lily's scuffed snow boots, then rose again with a plastic smile. "Come in. Don't just stand there. You'll let the cold in." Rachel placed her hand gently on Lily's back and guided her inside. The warmth of the house didn't register. It smelled the same. Cinnamon potpourri mixed with lemon cleaner. Clean, polished, lifeless. Melissa was on the couch, phone in hand, fingers flying across the screen. She glanced up briefly enough to make eye contact, then offered, "Hey," like she was talking to a clerk at a store she didn't want to be in. Kevin, their younger brother, gave a half wave from the kitchen doorway, before disappearing again like steam through a crack. The Christmas tree stood tall in the corner, a towering, symmetrical work of art. Red and gold ornaments glinted in the light. A star perched perfectly at the top, and the tree skirt was ironed. Of course it was. Every needle seemed to be in place, but Rachel felt no warmth from it, no memories. Just decor. Lily's eyes widened as she took it all in. The sparkle, the grandeur, the promise of a holiday. She'd only seen in books. Rachel saw the awe in her face and felt a tug of guilt so sharp it nearly stole her breath. They were here now, and Rachel wasn't sure whether that was brave or foolish. Walter stayed in his recliner, one leg crossed over the other, watching a football game that no one else seemed to care about. Rachel led Lily to the love seat across the room. They sat awkwardly, knees together, hands on laps, like guests at a funeral. So Barbara said brightly, sitting opposite them with a glass of white wine in hand, How long are you staying? Just overnight, Rachel replied. We'll head back tomorrow after lunch. Good, Melissa mumbled, not looking up. Rachel ignored the sting and turned her attention to Lily, who was now rummaging through her tote bag with a little nervous energy. I made cards, Lily whispered to her mom, then stood up and walked slowly toward Barbara. This one's for you, she said, handing over an envelope. It was white with a little red heart drawn in the corner. Barbara took it between two fingers, like it might smudge her polish. Oh, how sweet, she said with a tight smile, setting it on the coffee table without opening it. Rachel swallowed hard. Lily, still hopeful, stepped toward Melissa next. This is for you, Aunt Melissa. Melissa looked up, then back down. Thanks, she said, not even pausing her scrolling before placing the envelope face down beside her. Rachel felt her jaw tense, a slow burn rising behind her eyes. Her fists were clenched in her lap, but her voice stayed in her throat. Lily turned to Walter, hesitant now, moving slow. Hi, Grandpa, she said softly. This one's for you. Walter didn't glance away from the game. He stretched one hand toward her without looking. Lily placed the card gently into it, waiting. He dropped it onto the side table without even a glance. That was it. That was her big moment. Rachel saw her daughter's shoulders falter, just the tiniest shift, but enough to break something inside her. She had brought her daughter here thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd see her for who she was. This bright, kind, brave little soul. But they didn't see her at all. Not really. They saw a name, a shadow of Rachel, a reminder. Rachel forced a smile. Why don't we get your coat off, hon? Lily nodded silently, returning to her mom's side. She didn't say anything, didn't cry, didn't frown, but her energy dimmed. Rachel felt it like a power outage. Barbara was talking again. Something about the new extension they were adding to the kitchen in the spring. Melissa complained about airport delays. No one asked Rachel about her job. No one asked Lily about school. It was like they were background props in someone else's living room. Time stretched. Then Walter moved. Rachel noticed it before anyone else. He leaned forward, grunting slightly, and reached under the tree. He pulled out a large box wrapped in shimmering silver paper, topped with a bright red bow. It was almost absurdly perfect, like something from a catalog photo shoot. He held it out toward Lily. Says your name on it, doesn't it? Lily blinked. For me. He shrugged. Go ahead. Rachel's stomach turned. Every instinct screamed at her. She wanted to stop it, to step in. But Lily was already reaching for the box, her face lighting up again. Believing. Rachel nodded slowly, masking the alarm in her chest. Lily knelt down, placed the box in front of her, like it was sacred, and began unwrapping it with careful fingers. She didn't rip the paper, she unfolded it like origami. She wanted to remember this. Walter sipped his drink. Melissa barely looked up. Barbara took another sip of her wine. Rachel watched her daughter peel back the final corner of the paper, revealing a neat, glossy white box. She opened the lid. Rachel held her breath. Lily looked inside. She didn't say anything. For a moment, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Her small hands lifted a flap of tissue paper. There was nothing underneath. She reached deeper. Maybe thinking something was hidden. Maybe it had shifted in the box. But no, it was empty. Completely. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded. Lily looked up at her eyes, wide, searching for something, an answer, a reason. Then Walter chuckled. It was low and mean, like the sound of gravel under boots. What you were expecting. Something real, he said. World doesn't hand you gifts just for showing up, kid. Lily blinked. Her hands froze. Melissa chimed in, not missing a beat. She's just like her mom, always expecting handouts. Rachel felt the words hit like a slap. Her body tensed, every muscle ready to lash out, but she didn't move. Not yet. She looked at Lily. Her daughter didn't cry. Didn't speak. She just looked back into the box, staring at the nothing inside as if waiting for it to fill itself. Rachel wanted to grab her, to shout, to say, "You don't talk to her that way. You don't get to break her." But she couldn't move. Not yet. The whole room held its breath, or maybe it was just Rachel. Lily didn't blink, didn't flint. She closed the lid slowly, deliberately, with hands that had started to tremble. Then she looked up at Walter, and her voice when it came was soft. It's okay, she said. I got you something too. The sound of tearing wrapping paper filled the room, sharp, deliberate like the crackling of something too fragile to hold. It was the only sound there was. No music, no laughter. Just the gentle rustle of expectation being peeled back layer by layer in the small hands of a child who still believed magic might be hidden beneath the folds. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the silver box resting in her lap like treasure. Her face glowed faintly from the Christmas lights, reflecting off the shiny foil. She was careful with the paper, unwrapping it not with haste, but with reverence, as though the act itself mattered more than what was inside. Rachel watched from the couch, barely breathing. Her hands were clasped, tight knuckles, white, eyes locked on her daughter's every move. Every nerve in her body was coiled, anticipating. Walter leaned back in his recliner, eyes flicking between the television and the child at his feet. One hand on his whiskey glass, the other idly twirling the remote. He didn't look amused. He didn't look interested. He just looked removed. Melissa sat slouched on the opposite couch, phone in one hand, the other picking absent-mindedly at a fingernail. Kevin remained invisible in the kitchen, pretending none of it concerned him. No one said a word. And Lily, unaware of how much weight this moment carried, finally pulled off the last piece of paper. She smiled as she revealed a glossy white box underneath elegant, pristine ribbon curled just right. She looked up at Rachel, seeking permission. Rachel nodded, her lips forming a tight line. Her stomach twisted. Lily lifted the lid. Then she stopped. Inside the box was nothing. No tissue paper, no toy, no trinket. Just a white empty base, clean hollow. Lily stared at it, confused. She reached in, gently brushing the bottom like something might be stuck in the corner. She glanced over both shoulders, half expecting someone to say, "Wait, it's a joke," or "Look under the flap." But nothing came, just the flickering of lights and the slow tick of the grandfather clock. Then Walter's voice cut through the air like a rusted knife. What he said with a dry chuckle. "You thought life just gives you things for free?" Rachel's body went rigid. Lily didn't react. Not outwardly. She blinked once, twice, then looked back down at the empty box. Melissa chimed in from the couch, without looking up. She's just like her mom, always expecting people to hand her stuff. It wasn't said loudly, but it was sharp. Casual cruelty, the kind spoken by people who thought pain was a fair price for honesty. Rachel's chest burned. She wanted to speak, her mouth even opened, but no words came out. Because she remembered that feeling. That precise moment when you were still holding the gift wrap, still hoping, and someone looked you in the eye and said, you didn't deserve more than silence. She watched Lily freeze. Her daughter's hands were still inside the box now, limp. The light in her face dimmed, not all at once, but like someone slowly turned the dial down. Her shoulders slumped just a little. Her chin quivered the tiniest bit. But she didn't cry. Rachel's heart shattered anyway. I should say something, she told herself. Now this is the moment. But something in her stopped her. Not fear, not weakness, but years of conditioning. Years of being told that standing up would only make it worse. That dignity meant not reacting. That speaking made you small, emotional, out of control. She swallowed her anger like it was glass and stayed still. Lily closed the box slowly, the way you might put a lid on a memory you don't want to relive. Her hands trembled just slightly. Rachel saw it. She doubted anyone else did. The silence that followed was unbearable. And then Lily broke it. Her voice was small, barely more than a whisper, but it carried through the room like a bell in snow. "It's okay," she said. "I got you something too, Grandpa." Rachel turned to look at her daughter. Lily wasn't sad anymore. She wasn't trying to hide the hurt. She just was calm still. She reached into the pocket of her coat, pulling out a small square of folded paper. Rachel recognized it immediately. Thick white craft paper with a little corner that had been bent and smoothed over. Lily held it in both hands like something sacred. The room froze. Walter didn't move. Barbara glanced away, pretending to adjust a candle. Melissa finally lowered her phone, eyes narrowing slightly. Rachel didn't breathe. Lily stood up quietly, gently, and stepped across the rug. She stopped in front of Walter, who now looked at her fully. Not with amusement, not with curiosity, just with that same unreadable expression he always wore when someone expected something from him. Lily held the paper out. "I made this for you," she said. There was no sarcasm, no drama, just honesty. Walter blinked once, twice. He set his glass down, took the paper from her, and opened it with one hand. Rachel couldn't see what was drawn, only the way his face shifted. Not much, but enough. His brow creased. His eyes didn't narrow. They softened. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He stared at the drawing in silence. Melissa leaned forward, squinting. "What is it, a snowman or something?" Walter didn't respond. Lily stood with her hands clasped in front of her, now watching him with that same steady gaze. Rachel slowly rose from the couch and walked over, standing beside her daughter. She placed a hand lightly on Lily's back. Still, neither of them said anything. Walter looked older in that moment, not tired, not drunk, just distant, like a man staring down a road he thought was closed. Then, almost reverently, he folded the paper again, and without a word, he placed it on the table beside his chair. He stood up. No one moved. No one spoke. He walked out of the room, past the tree, down the hall. His footsteps fading. The door didn't slam. He didn't shout. He just left. Lily turned slightly, eyes wide, unsure. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, voice barely audible. Rachel knelt down, took her daughter in her arms, and whispered into her hair. "No, sweetheart," she said. "You did something brave." Melissa scoffed, muttering something under her breath. Rachel didn't hear it. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore, because something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. Walter unfolded the paper slowly, one hand gripping the drawing, the other still wrapped around his glass of whiskey. He didn't look hurried, nor did he seem to care that the room had stilled around him. The TV still flickered in the background, casting moving shadows on the tree. But as his eyes drifted down to the childlike scrawl before him, something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. His hand still. For the first time that evening, he stopped. Lily stood quietly in front of him, her fingers clasped at her stomach, her body still and patient in the way only children can be when they sense something important is happening. Rachel stood just behind her, close enough to feel the warmth of her daughter's presence, but far enough not to interrupt. Neither of them could see the drawing from where they stood, but Rachel knew exactly what it was. She had seen Lily working on it late into the night last week, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth. Crayons spread across the living room floor. She had peeked once, just enough to catch the outlines. 3 figures standing beneath a towering Christmas tree. One tall man, one woman with curly hair, and a little girl. They were holding hands. "I want him to remember," Lily had said, "that we're still a family, even if he forgot." Now Walter looked down at those figures, clumsy, uneven lines, wobbly stars, and hearts in the sky above them. But in the imperfection was something unbearably real. There was no bitterness in the drawing, no hint of resentment, just a wish, a memory imagined. And for a man who had built his life on silence, it was louder than any confrontation could have been. Melissa, who had finally looked up from her phone, squinted toward her father. "What is it?" she muttered. "A snowman." She smirked, expecting one of his usual dry remarks, but Walter didn't respond. He kept looking at the paper, not flipping it, not folding it, just staring. Barbara cleared her throat softly from her spot on the armchair, fiddling with her wine glass. She glanced at Rachel like she wanted her to do something to steer the moment away from whatever it was threatening to become. But Rachel didn't move, because she saw it now. Something had cracked. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no gasps, no grand gestures. But it was there in the slight slackening of Walter's jaw, in the crease between his brows, that hadn't been there moments ago, in the way he blinked and seemed to forget how to put the glass back to his lips. He looked old, no older than she'd ever seen him, as if, in that drawing, someone had handed him a mirror to a life he once lived, but had chosen to bear it. The silence stretched long and taut. Rachel's heart ached, torn between fury and sadness. She had spent years trying to forgive this man for his coldness, his judgment, his refusal to accept her choices. But now seeing him like this, not angry, not distant, just still, she wondered if this was the first time he'd truly looked at her since she was 22. Finally, Walter exhaled. It wasn't a sigh. It was something quieter. He folded the drawing carefully along the creases Lily had made and pressed it flat with his palm. Then, without a word, he leaned forward and placed it gently on the end table beside his chair. The room held its breath. He stood up. Rachel's hand instinctively dropped to Lily's shoulder. Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Where are you going?" Walter didn't answer. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked slowly, deliberately out of the living room, past the Christmas tree, down the hall. His steps weren't rushed. They weren't angry. They just were. No door slammed. No muttered cursing. Just the soft sound of his feet on hardwood fading into quiet. Lily turned slowly, her face turned up toward Rachel. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. Voice small and trembling but steady. Rachel knelt without hesitation, pulling her daughter close, wrapping her arms around her as if to shield her from everything. "This house couldn't be." "No, baby," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "You did something brave." Lily pressed her face into Rachel's shoulder and stayed there for a while. Still not crying. She didn't need to. What needed to be said had already been drawn and seen. That evening, the house moved on in strange quiet. Barbara didn't mention Walter's absence. She merely refilled her glass and asked Melissa if the roast should go in the oven. Melissa shrugged, clearly irritated that her father had not delivered the sarcastic dismissal she expected. Kevin reappeared briefly to help set the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. He hadn't said a word to Rachel all day. Dinner was a bland affair. There was no prayer, no toasts, no warmth, just the clatter of forks and the occasional cough. Lily ate silently, picking at her mashed potatoes. Rachel forced herself to chew, but nothing tasted like food. The drawing still sat on the end table, folded neatly, untouched, but it carried weight. It was no longer paper. It was presence. Rachel kept glancing down the hallway, half expecting Walter to re-emerge, to say something, anything, but he didn't. His chair remained empty. Barbara acted as though nothing unusual had happened. She asked Melissa about her promotion. She talked about booking a spring cruise. Rachel didn't respond to any of it. She couldn't, because she couldn't stop thinking about what had just occurred, or rather, what hadn't. There had been no apology, no redemption arc. Just a man walking away from a drawing like it had robbed him of something he'd spent decades protecting. And that was what made it real. That night, Rachel and Lily shared the guest room, the same one Rachel had grown up in. Though it no longer looked like hers, the posters had been replaced with abstract prints, the bedding was neutral beige, the bookshelves were gone. It was no longer a room, it was storage with a bed. Rachel lay awake for a long time, listening to Lily breathe softly beside her. She thought of all the words she could have said at dinner, all the things she could have screamed. But it wasn't her moment anymore. It was Lily's, and her daughter at 7 years old had said more with a crayon than Rachel had managed in 30 years. She turned to face Lily, brushing the back of her hand gently along the child's cheek. Lily stirred but didn't wake. Rachel whispered into the dark. "You saw something in him." "I forgot to look for." In the morning, the house was silent. Barbara handed Rachel a tin of leftover ham wrapped in foil and said, "Drive safe," with that same rehearsed smile. Melissa didn't come downstairs to say goodbye. Walter never reappeared. Rachel didn't ask where he was. She didn't want to know. She and Lily got into the car, buckled in, and started the drive back to Philadelphia. The road stretched long and gray, but the snow had stopped falling. A thin line of sunlight cracked the clouds. Rachel glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. The girl was watching the trees go by quiet. In her lap, tucked safely in her coat, was the same folded paper, not the one she'd given away. A second one, a backup. Rachel didn't ask what was on it. She didn't need to, because sometimes what matters most isn't what's said. It's what's understood in silence. It was a Tuesday morning, cold, overcast, and forgettable in every way, until Rachel opened the door. She wasn't expecting anything. The mail usually arrived later, and no one ever knocked, but there it was. A small unmarked cardboard box sitting quietly on the welcome mat, half dusted with snow. No postmark. No return address, just a name written in uneven, shaky block letters on top. Lily Anderson. Rachel stood still for a moment, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. The handwriting wasn't familiar, not immediately. But there was something old in it, something unpracticed, like it belonged to someone who hadn't written anything meaningful in a long time. She picked it up carefully and brought it inside. "Lily," she called. Her daughter poked her head out from the bedroom toothbrush, in hand-mouth foaming. "There's something here for you," Rachel said gently. "From someone." Lily came over, eyes wide. She stared at the box for a long moment before sitting down cross-legged on the rug. Rachel joined her heart pounding as if the cardboard might burst open with emotion. Lily peeled back the tape slowly, her small fingers deliberate and patient. Inside was a folded sheet of tissue paper, soft beige with faint floral patterns. Tucked inside it was a small wooden box, aged and smooth at the edges, with tiny painted roses curling up its sides. There was a little metal crank on the back. Lily turned it. A gentle melody began to play, clear, trembling, unmistakable. "Somewhere over the rainbow." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Lily listened quietly. She didn't smile, she didn't speak, she just let the song wash over her. There was a note nestled beneath the lid. Rachel reached for it, unfolding it with hands she hoped weren't shaking too badly. The paper was plain, slightly wrinkled. The handwriting was the same as on the box. The message was short. "To the bravest girl I know. Thank you for remembering her." No signature. But they didn't need one. Rachel looked up at her daughter, who was now cradling the music box against her chest, as if it were made of something far more precious than wood. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. She just held it and listened. Rachel swallowed hard, blinking back the rush that threatened to overflow. She wasn't sure what she felt, not quite peace, not forgiveness, but something close to being seen, not forgiven for leaving, not welcomed back, but acknowledged. Finally, the days that followed passed quietly. The snow kept falling. The city slowed down, wrapped in frost and muffled by the hum of space heaters and car tires sloshing through slush. Rachel and Lily returned to their usual rhythms. School drop-offs, bedtime stories, warm cocoa paper crafts on the living room floor. But the music box stayed on Lily's nightstand. Every evening before bed, Lily would wind it once. Sometimes she listened, other times she didn't. She'd just turn the crank, let the tune drift into the room like mist, and rest her fingers on the lid, as if checking to make sure it was still real. Rachel didn't press. She didn't ask what Lily felt. She just watched and waited, because some kinds of understanding bloom best in silence. 3 days after the box arrived, another envelope appeared in the mailbox. Rachel spotted it right away. Different from bills, different from junk. It was handwritten, addressed to Rachel Anderson. No return name. She stood by the mailbox for a full minute before opening it, fingers numb in the cold, but unwilling to wait another second. There were only 3 lines inside. "I was wrong about you. She's a good kid. I hope you're doing okay." Same handwriting. Still no signature. Rachel read it twice, then a third time. She didn't cry. Not right away. She simply stood there, surrounded by the low hum of passing traffic and the quiet ache of January air, and let the words sink in. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation, but it was more than she'd ever been given, more than she'd dared to hope for. She clutched the envelope to her chest and walked back inside, closing the door gently behind her like she was afraid the note might dissolve in too much light. That night after dinner, and dishes after teeth had been brushed and pajamas slipped on, Rachel sat beside Lily on the bed. The music box sat between them, silent, waiting. Lily turned the crank slowly. The first few notes trickled out like rain. Rachel watched her daughter listen. She saw something in her face. Not sadness, not quite joy either. Something in between. Something steady. "I think Grandpa remembers her now," Lily said softly, without looking up. Rachel blinked. Who, she asked, though she already knew. Grandma Margaret Lily answered, running her thumb along the edge of the box, the way she used to make him laugh. Rachel couldn't speak right away. Instead, she reached out and brushed a lock of hair from Lily's forehead, then leaned down and kissed it. "I think you're right," she whispered. "I think he does." Lily gave a tiny nod. They didn't need to say more. The box played on quiet unwavering. Outside the window, snow had started to fall again. Thin, steady flakes drifting through the streetlights, coating the city in white. Rachel watched it in silence, her heart full, but strangely weightless. She thought about all the years she had spent believing the door was closed, that no message would ever get through. And then a little girl showed up with nothing but paper crayons and a truth too soft to be ignored. Later that night, long after Lily had drifted to sleep with the music box still resting beside her, Rachel sat at the kitchen table turning the envelope over in her hands. She didn't know if she would ever hear from him again. Maybe that note was it. Maybe that was all he had left to give. But she had something now that she hadn't had before. Not reconciliation, not repair, but recognition. And somehow that was enough. She thought of Margaret, the woman she barely remembered, the one whose photograph still sat on her father's mantel. Maybe Lily reminded him of her. Maybe the drawing had peeled something open that years of silence had tried to keep sealed. Rachel thought of the drawing, of Lily's hand, of the way a single act of kindness, offered with no expectation, no demand, could cut through decades of silence. Kindness doesn't always change people, Rachel thought. But sometimes it opens a door just wide enough for a note to get through. She walked to Lily's room, and peeked in. The girl was curled up, music box held to her chest like a lullaby. Rachel smiled. Then she turned off the hall light and went to bed in the quiet hum of snowfall, brushing softly against the windows, as if the world itself had been holding its breath and was now exhaling. Sometimes the most powerful changes come from the quietest acts. Lily didn't shout, didn't demand, didn't seek revenge. She simply offered a drawing, and with it reminded a hardened man of who he once was. This story isn't just about family wounds. It's about the courage to offer light where darkness lived too long. To me, it's a reminder that kindness, real quiet, unselfish kindness, can open doors that anger never will. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you know, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that reflect the power of compassion, resilience, and soft but unshakable hope. Sometimes one small gift is enough to change everything.